Welcome to episode 4 of No Power Panel. I'm one of your hosts, Noam.
And I'm Isaac.
Thanks for joining us. We last sat down together in just before the federal election leaders debates, and I think that overall we pretty much predicted fairly on point what each leader was going to end up doing.
So
In
the
the
winner of
debates,
the
I think.
debates. So the winner of the debates was us,
The winner of the
because it was
debates
just
was,
smart and
well, the
clear.
winner of the debates was maybe us and maybe nobody. Um, but ultimately, I think we can pretty definitively say that that's to the benefit of Mark Carney and the Liberals. Um,
Mhm.
Going into the debates, they were ahead. It appears that Mark Carney did well enough to skate by on some of the bigger attack points that people tried to go at him over, and at least what we have seen so far, uh, and reactions, it looks like everyone kind of felt like their leader did the best, which makes it a kind of draw.
And when it's a draw, the person who coming in, is doing the best in the state of the race, and then it's a draw, and we're saying, okay, so the state of the race isn't going to change. Well, then the winner is whoever was winning, I guess. You know, I do think that in these debates, I felt lucky that there was some actual like substantive policy discussion. Like you compare it. I know you don't want to only compare yourself to the American media, but it's like that's all we get. So, like in terms of a lot of the stuff we consume, but like comparing it to American debates, like it made me grateful that like in a Canadian debate, they're talking about specific bills, they're talking about specific policy decisions, they're discussing, cooperation with the provinces over certain issues. I do think there was a little bit of jurisdictional creep on some of the issues that, like, I don't think really has to do with the federal government that much. But overall, substantive, like, actual discussion of policy. A debate is kind of a exercise in, like, showmanship, and I don't know how much it correlates to actually leaders' ability to govern. But in terms of as far as debates go, I did think the actual content was substantive.
I
And
agree
I
with
think
that.
that's partly due to the leaders. Like, I think Carney like actually answers questions versus Trudeau. When he would debate, he would never actually say anything. And Carney actually, as much as it's like kind of become a meme, like it's like Carney will like, so it's threefold, it's three things, and then he'll go through like each one, which is like kind of boring and lecturely. But I think that's what people want from Carney, and it also leads to more substantive answers. Like he's actually
Absolutely.
discussing.
He doesn't try to redirect the question into
Mhm.
his preformed little 30-second stump speech. He actually wants to address the question he's asked by the moderator. He also actually wants to address the points raised by the other leaders, which I think is
Mhm.
also really fascinating, is it's not just that he's answering the questions, it's that he's then actually responding in a normal human way that's clear he's actually listened and wants to address the questions. It makes you kind of wonder what a question period in Parliament with a Mark Carney prime
Yeah.
ministership looks
And
like.
I'm just happy we never have to hear those in the middle class and working hard to join it ever again. Honestly,
Yeah.
like, and we're getting different catchphrases, from Poilievre, which "axe the tax" has now been rebranded to "axe the taxes." I guess
Mhm.
if your one policy plank that was 3 words has been, taken away from you, what can you do? You just add a plural to it and expand the umbrella of what that covers. So that seems to be what has happened
He
there.
certainly seems to think that it's what will make things work. So what we're gonna talk about today is we're gonna go through some kind of post debate polling and an immediate reaction from Abacus Data that they put out late last night in our segment of Horse Race Disco. And then we're going to watch some clips from the debate that we think are some key moments that we want to reflect on a little bit. And then we're going to touch on some of the process stories that surrounded the debates, because in case you haven't been paying super close attention, the debates themselves were not actually the biggest pieces of news over that time period. There were some process stories which quite dominated the coverage that I think we need to touch on. And so we'll go from there. We'll talk about our winners and losers for the week. And then we have a clip to round out the week, like always, of just some inspiring words to head into the long weekend with. So, with that said, I think we should move straight into Horse Race Disco.
And if you want to see our fun Horse Race Disco graphic, you can check out the YouTube channel if you're not watching on YouTube. We're going to have some more visuals today. So if you ever want to get more of a sense of the visuals when we're talking, you can head over to YouTube and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well.
Please do. All right. Yeah. So, one of the first pieces of data that we have here is the debate impact on the leaders' impressions with Canadians. And what we can see here is that Mark Carney leads the field out of the debates with a 59% positive impression and a 22% negative. Pierre Poilievre is at 53% positive and 30% negative. So they both are in majority positive impressions from the debates territory, quite substantially so. Then we move on to Jagmeet Singh, where he's at 41% positive and 35% negative. I think that probably Jagmeet's interruptions was a little bit too much, a little bit too pushy for some people. Yves Francois Blanchet was positive at 25% and negative at 31%. Now, I'm assuming these numbers are mostly based on the English language debate.
Well, this was based on the English language debate, actually. So they polled based on people who watched the English language debate. And so I do think, and I was watching it with some friends, and there was talk every time Blanchet mentions, Canada, he's mentioning it like it's another state, and it's like, Quebec and Canada.
He's already acting like it's a separate partnership.
That's their nationalist party. That's their prerogative. But like the thing is, when you're in an English language debate and you're polling the people who listened and watched the English language debate, obviously that's going to be the impression of him, because it's like, well, I don't like this guy because he's not like, for Canada, like, and I did think, just because I don't feel like we're going to talk about Blanchet later, I just want to say a couple things now that I'm thinking of it. One thing I found funny is he talks about, he's like, well, we need Quebec and Canada at the table with the US. And I just like couldn't get that image out of my head, like of Carney, like going to meet with Trump, and like what Blanchet's dream is, they're bringing him along for those negotiations. And it's like they're a third like party in these negotiations, because they're like a separate and equal partner with Canada. It's like, we'll be on Team Canada, but you never even acknowledge us as... Trump doesn't even know what Quebec is. I'm sorry, but let's be real here.
No, and especially if Blanchet's imaginary vision is that it's a table with Trump and Carney and then him, and it's like, not only is that unrealistic, but Blanchet is a minority party leader in the federal parliament, where he doesn't even represent a majority of Quebec seats in Ottawa.
And actually, that came up that came up a couple times where Carney's like, "I've met with the premiers," and he's like, "Well, you haven't met with me." It's like, well, you know what? He's probably more like it's better that he's meeting with Legault and not you. Legault is the one
Mhm.
representing Quebec in this case. You're not like a premier.
No, 100%. And it's something that Blanchet does in these debates. It's something he did in 2019, 2021, and this time, especially in the English debate. Um, that comes off, I think, to English Canada as quite an arrogant position to be taking, where he acts like because he is the leader of the bloc, that he has some sort of special claim on being a voice for Quebec. That may have been true at a time for the bloc leader when the bloc was winning 45, 50, 55 seats of Quebec's seats. That's not where they're at even in 2021 when they had quite a good showing.
Well,
And
what
it's something that Gilles Duceppe never used to do. He always spoke as though he was another opposition leader in Ottawa, and he spoke for Quebec's interests. But he never tried to act like he could be Quebec's official representative at a table around negotiations.
And Blanchet talks in absolutes as well. Like
Mhm.
he like in the French language debate, he was saying things like Quebecers want this, Quebecers don't want this. And I think that's like kind of off-putting, probably. Like, when something has 50% support or 60, that is a large amount of support in Quebec. But to talk in like absolutism, like Quebecers, the Quebecois in the French debate, a monolith, it's like I think it is kind of like not degrading, but it can be like condescending. And I think at the
Mhm.
same time, that's like a lot of the media, and I'm kind of jumping to the French debate now, but like a lot of the media was like speculating about, they're like, how does Carney have so much support in Quebec? His French isn't even that good. And it's like, well, Quebecers are Canadians too, and they to assume that someone's just gonna vote. Now, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I do feel this way. To assume someone's gonna vote just based on like how good Carney's like English, French is, sorry, like they can understand the points. It's kind of like infantilizing to say these people don't care about anything else other than how well he speaks the language. It's like they're not engaged in like policy. They don't care about like, Canada's international position or the cost of living or any of these things, just based on like they only care about like the French language. And it does kind of remind me how people talk about like Jews caring about Israel. It's like you're taking away that like group's ability to care. One, you're assuming they feel one way on the issue. Two, you're assuming they don't have any like um it's like any knowledge or desire to vote based on anything else. And it's really it frustrates me when people talk about groups like that way, like they'd only be voting on like one specific issue.
I 100% agree. It's like saying that English Canada wouldn't vote for Jean Chrétien because of the way that he speaks, or
Mhm.
like there weren't still English Canadians who voted for Stéphane Dion. Right? Like it's
Yeah.
very demeaning to what a group of people feel to lump them all in and say this one specific issue, whatever it is the only thing that you're allowed to base your vote off of. So I think that what these numbers really show is that Mark Carney comes out of the debate very largely
Oh,
unscathed. For
and I do
him,
think, yeah.
for there to no, it's all good. For there to have been a turnaround dramatically in the numbers coming out of this debate, you would have had to see this positive Mark Carney number in the 30s or 40s. The fact that it's in the high 50s means that there are still enough Canadians who who felt even better about him coming out of the debate. that his core number, his core support is quite solidly still going to stay behind him.
Yeah, like he came into the debate with about 42%. He's polling at about 42%, 43%. For it to be bad for him, it has to be below that number, because that has to mean there's less people who had a positive impression of him than were already saying they were going to vote for him. For it to be 16% higher, and actually among, like conservative, in this poll, they had like conservative, liberal, accessible voters, where it's like if someone identified themselves as they could vote conservative or liberal, it was in the 60s for positive impression. So that's kind of like, that's a very good debate for him. Like not
It's
even to say
it's a great
decent,
debate.
it actually, if anything, probably opens up his accessible voter pool. And I think the only way to see these numbers like lower, like what Jagmeet says, is yeah, I totally agree, is that it was like the interrupting comes off as negative. And I think going into this debate, we said Carney just had to seem above it all and not like a politician. And he did exactly that. I think I saw one theory that like Jagmeet is interrupting because it's to mess up Poilievre's like clips for social. And
I
I don't know.
100% buy that.
You
No,
do
I
buy it.
100%, I 100%, as I was watching the debate last night, um I was watching Jagmeet whenever Poilievre got into a ramp up, and you could tell that he was about to try and get that clippable content, that 30-second clip, Jagmeet was chirping off to the side. And I turned to Caitlin, my wife, last night, and she is not nearly as political as I am, so I was watching it in my headphones by myself and just kind of reacting aloud to her. And I turned to her at one point and said, I think that Jagmeet is just on a kamikaze mission to completely take Poilievre out of this contest in the debate. And I think that that's genuinely, he certainly was in it for himself as well, and he had moments where he went after Carney on specific issues. But for the
Yeah.
most part, every single opportunity that he had to disrupt Poilievre, to make it a contest between him and Poilievre, where Carney got to do what we had talked about and just stand off to the side and let them go at each other, that he felt that was his role last night, and it worked really, really well for him, I think, in terms of doing that specific mission. Now, does it improve the NDP chances overall? Probably not. But
it
I think
improves
that if
them
his
more.
mission was to make it so that there was no chance of a conservative government, he probably succeeded in that mission.
And it improves them more, I think. I think he would have had a higher negative impression number if he went after Carney more. If anything, so it's like the
Absolutely.
NDP are polling at like 9% right now, 9. And this is a 41% positive impression. He does have an accessible like voter base. And I think if he was attacking Carney like he attacked Poilievre, which he could have done in past NDP governments, that could have been their strategy. And it's been an okay strategy in the past when that like secondary position is kind of more fluid. For example, I want to bring up the 2011
So
federal
let's go to
debate.
that.
Like, yeah, so in this debate, perfect. We have a
This is
graphic here. In this debate, we have a graphic here from the 2011 opinion polling. On the debate occurred on April 12th, and we can see here that the NDP really surged after that time. And in that debate, Jack Layton went hard after Ignatieff, and he kind of buried Ignatieff. And I think in that context, where it's like Harper is looking like the clear favorite, and people are still trying to figure out who's going to be the person we're going to coalesce around as the anti-Harper vote. In 2011, it became Layton, and it became Layton partially after the debate. I don't want to attribute it all to that because he ran a great campaign outside of that as well. But that was very different circumstances than this debate, where Carney's the clear front runner, and there's this like huge fear of Poilievre. In 2015, it coalesced around Trudeau. So when it's that like
so
anti-vote, but it's not firm, then I think you have more accessibility to attack the Liberals, or Liberals attack
Yeah.
NDP.
I 100% agree. Let's just take a moment. I'll look at the moment where Jack Layton probably ended Michael Ignatieff's chances of becoming prime minister. Because it was, I think, one moment in the debate where he just completely buried the Liberal chances of doing that. So this is the kind of thing that like a past NDP leader might have done. And Jagmeet kind of specifically chose not to have these kinds of moments last night.
I've got to ask you then, why do you have the worst attendance record in the House of Commons of any member of Parliament? If you want to be Prime Minister, you better learn how to be a member of Parliament first. You know, most Canadians, if they don't show up for work, they don't get a promotion.
Yeah, and he had so many lines like that against Ignatieff that night. There was when he was talking about proportional or like representation or like electoral reform, and he kind of buried him on that too. Like he was taking every opportunity, and what we saw from Jagmeet last night was very different. One, I think, Carney didn't give him the opportunities that like Ignatieff. Like I think it was a combination of Ignatieff having a poor performance in 2011, but also that was obviously not their strategy. They came in, and I think probably with the same mindset that we mentioned on Monday. Their strategists, Jagmeet's advisors, are it was go after Poilievre. That's what's gonna make you likable to the people we need you to be likable at. Differentiate yourself from Carney on the key issues where you are different, like the pipeline, like Palestine. Show that there is a difference. Try to bring up healthcare, even though the moderators never wanted to on both debates. But not attack Carney. Show your difference between you and Carney, and attack Poilievre. And I think that seems to have been their strategy going on.
100%. Can we just spend a second talking about the fact that I think that this is the first election debate that certainly I can remember in Canada where healthcare was not one of the major topics.
Healthcare was not one of the major topics, and for as much talk as it said this is the ballot box issue is the trade war with the US, which was, and like potential Canadian sovereignty, which is a big deal. It was not. It was only it was really just the first topic. It was not as much of the debate as I thought it was going to be.
No, it was more of a topic in the French debate, honestly.
Yeah.
And I think that Poilievre really had a mission to make it so that last night was not about Trump. I think that you can imagine a scenario where if Carney had been able to make last night's debate purely about Trump, if every question he had been able to take and turn into an answer about Trump and the trade war, then you can imagine a scenario where this number for Poilievre, which is which leader did more to win your vote, and Poilievre's number here is at 47. That
47
number probably would have
the entire debate.
47 of the people who watched the entire debate. Yeah. But either way, it is higher than I think some people would have expected if the debate had been entirely about Trump. The fact that Poilievre was able to make that not the case, was able to make the debate about pipelines and about energy and about the cost of living, and he was really and crime. I mean, Poilievre in the crime section, I think, probably did himself more favors than at any other point during the night. Is that enough to sway voters? Maybe, maybe not. But I think that he certainly looked at that as his opportunity to swing big as much as possible.
Yeah, and I do think what comes out of a debate, like we can sit here and we watch the whole thing, and we not only watch the whole thing, we're going to talk about it after on a video medium. Like we're not the average Canadian. And, it's the debate's gonna have like at its peak, I think it had around like 50% of Canadians watch some of it. So that includes watched a little. So we have three categories here
Yeah.
in terms of this result: watched all, watched some, and watched a little. And at most, 50% of Canadians watched a little of it. And if we're talking about the general electorate, the majority will have watched none or a little, right? So what comes out of the debate is those moments, and if there's none of those moments, like, then it's hard to capitalize, right? Like, it's hard to actually
Absolutely.
change the basis. And if we look at the watched a little numbers, Carney has 44% said he did the most to lead to win their vote, while only 37% said Poilievre. So I don't know if this is just like a voter enthusiasm question. Like, what is this a quasi question for? Like, the people watching the whole debate, the ones most riled up and engaged, are those conservative supporters right now. I do think they have a more energized base versus like the average Canadian is just like, well, I don't like Trump and Carney seems like he's smart. Like,
I think that's a piece of it. I think that the other piece of it is that the Trump and tariff conversation was the first topic. So if you were somebody who was tuning in for the first 20 minutes, half an hour, and you watched a little, then that's the section where I think we can agree Mark Carney was the strongest. And so you come away with that impression of Mark Carney versus Poilievre, who that was probably his weakest section of the night.
That's a great point. I don't think the people who watched a little were tuning in at 8:30, like an hour and a half into just to be clear, because I'm in Eastern time zone. They're not tuning in an hour and a half in to a 2-hour debate. They're looking up what time the debate's on, putting it on, and then getting bored after 20 minutes and saying, okay, it's exactly what I expected. Carney, is talking like how I expect him to. Poilievre's not like actually being as strong as I want him to, or whatever. He's kind of smarmy. Okay, turn it off. Like you know what I mean? Versus the people who are watching the whole thing might not see it that way.
Absolutely. And I think that each of the leaders, to talk about the click game that happens afterwards, and that really does kind of define who won and who lost the debate, each of the leaders gave their teams the moments that they were looking for to clip out and push the ads with, right? No leader had a moment where truly, as much as Jagmeet Singh was trying to chirp and cut off Poilievre was still able to get going at a couple of moments. And I think had a couple of the stronger moments of the night, which his team does, that are very, very good at social media strategy, are going to be able to get some use out of. So I wouldn't say that this was a complete loss for Poilievre. But I think that he didn't do what he needed to do to completely disrupt the race. So I think that the last little bit of polling data we should put up here is just kind of what the trend line has looked like during this RIP period, and see that overall things have remained, with a couple of outlier things here and there, very, very steady, and those trend lines are not moving much. And I don't think last night did anything where we're going to see the kind of shift that we saw in the 2011 numbers that we looked at to dramatically change the course of the election.
Well, it's like we saw these remarkable shifts we've never seen before in periods of times we've never seen before, right before the RIP period, when, Trudeau first resigned, then Trump announced tariffs, then Trump's calling Canada the 51st state and threatening annexation and calling Trudeau Governor Trudeau. And then Carney is having his liberal leadership campaign, and it's going to look like Carney's going to win. That's where we saw the most dramatic shift we've ever seen. And it's kind of wild that now, during the actual RIP period, we've probably had the most stable election, like, numbers we've seen in a really long time. At 2019 and 2021 were relatively stable. Like, Liberals and Conservatives were pretty much tied the whole race, but there were like some moderate swings where I don't think we've seen one like period where we could even call there a swing. Like I don't see any really shift in any momentum throughout the writ period.
That's absolutely true. And I think that, yeah, I think that all of the polls that we have seen that might suggest that kind of thing, if there were other polls coming out at the same time backing that, have all gone on to look like outliers.
And then
And
even in the tracking polls, they revert back like in the next couple days.
exactly. Exactly. I mean, you can imagine a scenario where if Trump really did just shut up for the entire writ period and didn't do or say a thing, that maybe Poilievre would be able to push the campaign back into the territory of things where he is slightly ahead. But given that Trump has trigger fingers and has things that just he's gonna keep doing and saying stupid shit. You know, the press secretary, his press secretary came out a couple of days ago and once again suggested that Canada become the 51st state. And it's like, as long as the Americans are making that kind of noise and that kind of trouble, that plays into Carney's hands. And that is going to continue playing into Carney's hands. And that's why we see this trend line that we're looking at just remain steady. So I think that that's probably good for this edition of Horse Race Disco. Let's get into some clips from the debate.
Sure.
Because and I think I have 4 pulled up here that I want to go over. The first one for me was one of the lines of the night. I know it's not one of the ones that's going to get a ton of playback, but I think that it was a moment that did for Blanchet what he needed from the debate. I think it's probably one of the moments that his team is going to be cutting and sending out with a French translation. That really does kind of speak to what the Bloc Québécois always want to be running on. So, all right. So here is what I think was probably Blanchet's line of the night.
Yeah, Mr. Carney, you are becoming a real Canadian leader, saying one thing in French and another one in English.
And I just think that moment really does, for Blanchet, do everything that the Bloc Québécois needs done in the area that they are going to continue to win votes and will always win votes, which are Quebec nationalists. It really does. I think it paints Carney as a very prototypical Canadian English Canadian politician, because it's messaging that we always get from the Bloc, and in this case, it also happens to be true. And so
yeah.
I think that they're going to be able to send out that clip with the receipts, and it might damage Carney a little bit in some of the francophone areas of Quebec where the Liberals are hoping to make their majority happen.
Yeah. And I do think, the Liberals, they want to win a certain number of seats in Quebec. Like, I think they'd be happy with 40 seats in Quebec, in which case they don't really need those areas. But obviously they need all of Montreal. They need all of Montreal suburbs. They need, if they need to maintain right now in Quebec, and they probably want to grow a little bit, as you said, to make a majority happen. But I think with their numbers in Atlantic Canada and Ontario, they might be okay. But they and some growth in BC as well. But they definitely needed Carney not to be awful in the French debate too, on top of this moment. I think more than anything, it's this clip could be something, but it's as much as you want to paint someone that way, Carney had to really stumble in the French debate, which I don't think he did. And I think a lot of conservatives were betting on him stumbling in the French debate. And if anything, the French debate and the English debate were very similar. A lot of the same things happened in it. I called so many things in the English debate because I'm like, oh, they're talking about this. Okay, this person's going to say this. Like when they were talking about housing and Singh brought up that Poilievre's record as housing minister, they built 6 houses, which
that's our next clip.
The federal government built 6 houses. I was like, okay, here we go. Poilievre's going to say 200,000. So we can play the clip and then I'll give my take because I want to talk about housing and climate. And so let's listen to the housing clip.
So let's listen to the housing clip.
To the topic of housing. Now, it's very important. Obviously, we need to build homes that people can afford. Mr. Poilievre had the opportunity to show us what he could do. He was the Minister of Housing under Stephen Harper. And during that time, guess how many homes he built? He built 6 homes during that entire time. This is not something you can trust to build homes. He built 6 homes. 200,000. This has been confirmed again and again. He built 6 homes. That's it. Now, the problem, though, with Mr. Carney as well, he's laid out a plan. The problem is that when he was the chair of Brookfield Investments, this is a company that made a strategic decision to buy up affordable homes in cities like Toronto where people were paying a decent rent. And they purposely bought those homes, kicked out the tenants, and jacked up the rents. That is not someone you can trust, sadly, to deal with the housing crisis when Mr. Carney, you profited off of it.
We're going to get responses here. Mr. Poilievre first, Mr. Carney second.
First of all, Mr. Singh,
hold this up to remind you.
The Toronto Star, the Toronto Star debunked your falsehoods.
No, it was 6 homes,
and I appreciate neither Liberals or NDP are very good with math, but in that year, the year I was the minister, if I could,
which is great.
The year I was,
let's let him answer.
In the year I was
high enough though.
The year I was minister, we had 200,000 homes built, and guess what the average price of a home was at the time? $450,000.
And guess what happened at the end of the conservative reign?
One bedrooms rented out for $900. And that's since that time, housing costs have actually doubled under the Liberals.
They doubled
and
now we
have Mr. Carney making tens of billions of dollars of spending promises that will ultimately continue to build bureaucracy. We don't need more bureaucracy in Ottawa. We tried that for 10 Liberal years, Mr. Carney. What we need is to build homes in communities. And that means axing taxes on home building and getting the government out of the way so that builders can actually build.
I think,
Mr. Carney, you are on housing. We need a change, and you, sir, are not a change.
Mark Carney.
I'm going to pick up on, I thought that answer was quite revealing. The first thing is that it's an attitude towards housing that absolutely ignores affordable housing, deeply affordable housing, issues with vulnerable people, ignores the rental market, ignores all other aspects of it. So the 6 are the relevant. Mr. Singh is absolutely right. The 6 are the relevant.
200,000.
The 200,000 are a different part of the housing market. There are many.
So
all right.
I've been chomping at the bit to respond to this because this is an issue I'm very passionate about. I want to be clear just for the anyone who might be listening to this, just because it's not illustrated in the debate. They just keep saying 200,000. So Jagmeet Singh is referring to how many housing units the federal government built, aka subsidized by and paid for by the federal government. We don't have a national builder in Canada, so it's not like they had the labor, but paid for as federal housing units. 6. The number Poilievre's using, 200,000, is the number of total housing units built in Canada by the private market that year.
Which as the Minister of Housing, he has nothing to do with. Nothing to do with.
This really largely is a issue for municipal and provincial jurisdictions. A lot of the only impact the federal government can really have is funding for the subsidized program. So that 6 number is pretty relevant because that's one of the only ways they can. And then other things like taxes, which were brought up, you could force. They don't even have direct jurisdiction over development charges, but they can override and move into the provincial municipal jurisdictions and or force municipalities to cut them by saying we're going to tie your funding to cutting the charges. So it's like they don't even really, those aren't really the federal taxes. Like, so it's really just forcing other jurisdictions to change their taxes. And you have to offset that by giving them funding. Really, the key thing is funding. That's really the only control the federal government has here, is funding either new homes or funding municipalities to force changes either through zoning or through like rental, laws. So, and tying it to those things. And I think that's why in this exchange, Carney probably comes off the best, because you're looking, the average person seeing these two extremes just like going at each other, and Carney's like, yes, Singh, you're right, I hear you. It's totally true. This is what we can do. They're not really explaining things. They're both trying to get their catchphrases in. And it's very frustrating for me to watch when it's like, most people don't know. And there's actually been polling that has come out that's completely like blames the federal government or gives them credit for housing. And unless they come in with a sledgehammer, which no one has done, the market is going to screw over the average home buyer or renter. So, and they don't do it because traditionally for the Liberals and Conservative, most of their voting base are homeowners and they want the home values to go up. They don't want the home values to go down. So they're incentivized to not change anything. The system, the market, is working exactly how it's supposed to for their base. So I do think that's where Singh's trying to draw that daylight, is we need to change something. We need to be forceful in disrupting the current trajectory. And I'm optimistic that Carney actually would, and I do actually like his housing minister, Nate Erskine-Smith. I don't think they have as much of a focus on deeply affordable, but they're at least acknowledging it and actually have made promises in that realm that past Liberal governments have not, because this is such a salient issue right now. So that's my take. You can go off.
Absolutely. No, and I think you nailed that, right? Like, it's you completely covered that. The reality is that I think that Poilievre comes off the worst in that moment, because he's just fibbing about what his record on housing is. And anybody who takes even 30 seconds to look into it sees that Singh and Carney are telling the truth in terms of the numbers of what actually is relevant to what Poilievre was responsible for as Minister of Housing. I think that the other thing about that clip that I just like love is, and I don't love a lot of things about Mark Carney, but the ability that he just has to constantly take what Jagmeet Singh is saying and lightly agree with it, and then just push it off to the side and be the person who actually is the one who is fully then answering and hitting on the key other points to the issue. All throughout the night, he does this, and it really does harm the NDP and increase that Liberal identity as the people who have that ability to speak for sensible, progressive Canadians, while at the same time framing himself as a business Liberal. It's something that we haven't seen a Liberal leader with the ability to do since Jean Chrétien, right? Justin Trudeau always presented as a progressive Liberal and as just a progressive Liberal. And granted to him, he was able to win 3 elections off of that. But that's how he presented. Ignatieff presented very much as a more centrist right-wing Liberal. Stéphane Dion presented as a very progressive Liberal. Paul Martin presented as I'm generalizing here, but like, Paul Martin presented as a very business moderate Liberal. Jean Chrétien was really the last Liberal leader that we saw who had this ability that Carney is able to replicate, to speak very honestly to both, to be able to present to both in a way that both progressive Liberals and centrist Liberals can look at him and go, he's one of us, he's speaking to me. And it's an incredible talent that he has. That is why he is as far up in this election as I think he is.
I think it's also the reason why he's actually gained a lot of the support that would have gone to the NDP, is he doesn't talk to the NDP about the NDP with contempt. Like, he's not responding to Singh like we saw Ignatieff respond to Layton and say things like, well, that's why you're always going to be an opposition party. Like, this kind of like I'm owed the support that's supporting the NDP, which a lot of people who do support the NDP hate about the Liberals. This kind of like lecturing at that, like, you're just going to lead to a conservative government. He's not taking that route. He's taking the kind of route to accept the position that Singh is saying, and exactly as you said, lay out the feasible or like whatever policy positions that they can that they do have control over, and in the way about in which they're going to do it. Take that exactly as you said. It's so different from Trudeau, because Trudeau would come off just like Singh. When it's Trudeau and Singh up there, they're both shooting off their little points, their little phrases, and there's no daylight between them. You don't really see a difference, and I think that's what allows Carney to have a broader appeal. The tent is huge right now for them to be able to say they're getting 43% support or whatever from Canadian. 43% of the Canadian population is a huge tent for our country. So to maintain that, he has to basically keep doing what he's doing, and he did it in the debate. So
he seems to be able to pull it off. All right, so now let's move on to clip number 3, which is about pipelines.
We've got. Hang on a second. I want to give you a chance to speak to Mr. Singh's criticism about oil and gas subsidies and Mr. Poilievre's criticism about the industrial carbon tax.
Okay, I'm going to make 3 points. I'll make 4 if you want me to respond to that, but I want to make 3. The first is that I answered this question last night, but I think the puck had already dropped in the Canadiens game, so not everyone heard it. Yes, end oil and gas subsidies.
That's why you need New Democrats.
Secondly, I would have done it independently. Secondly, recognizing that the biggest component of that was the cost of building Keystone. Keystone, which is the pipeline which has helped to increase oil and gas oil exports rather by 50% in this country. That is an asset of the people of Canada. We own it. And the question of what to do it. So it's not a subsidy that has disappeared, it's actually an asset of Canada. The third point, though, in terms of where the oil and gas industry, particularly the oil industry, wants to go, which is to become low carbon in the production and transportation of oil. One of the big projects we need to move forward with is carbon capture and storage, the Pathways project, so that we have oil and gas that is competitive, not just today, 10 years from now and 20 years from now, as the world uses less. We want to have more market share. We need to do that. My government will move that.
But by definition, a subsidy isn't when we buy a pipeline. I'm talking about subsidies that go to oil and gas companies. Independent, separate from the country, oil and gas companies. That's what I'm talking about.
The figure you quoted last night included the cost of the pipeline.
Do you want to address
billions
his
of
point?
dollars are spending. We got to stop spending.
Sorry, can we get you to address his point about the industrial carbon tax?
How much will the industrial carbon tax add to the price of a car?
So the first thing I want to say is I'm going to address the broader point. Broader point is the entire absence of a climate plan from Mr. Poilievre, which, by the way, is going to put our industry and our country at a disadvantage as we're looking for new trading partners. Guess what? Most people want to deepen our partnership in Europe, in Asia. Those countries care about whether or not you've made progress. Second thing is, we're designing a program so that the big polluters pay Canadians at home for making responsible climate choices, for retrofitting their home, getting their emissions down, or improving otherwise. And that is smart climate policy. It's better for the big polluters, and it's better for Canadians.
Pierre Poilievre.
Mr. Carney didn't answer my question. I asked how much would an industrial carbon tax on Canadian steel add to the price of a car. He won't answer because he knows that it will be very expensive because there's lots of steel in cars. Now, Mr. Carney has temporarily
But you know the answer?
hid in the carbon tax.
You're just throwing out
thousands of dollars. Thousands of dollars.
Making it up.
Extra cost.
I do know the answer to that question. He's wrong.
When you add taxes to steel, you raise the price of everything that uses steel. When you add taxes when you add the carbon tax onto the price of, for example, fertilizer, you increase the price of food. So while Mr. Carney has temporarily hidden the Liberal carbon tax at the pumps while keeping the tax fully in law and planning to raise it after the election, he's also going after a tax on our industry that will ultimately be passed on to you. After a lost Liberal decade of rising costs, we cannot afford a fourth Liberal term. We need a new government that will fully axe the carbon tax, increase the jobs that we have here in Canada, and bring down your cost of living.
We got just a little over 3 minutes left in this segment. So, Mr. Singh, I want to ask you, do you think climate change is still a priority from Canadians?
All right.
So essentially, they start the energy and climate topic, and until they get to the point where, like, Pakin is basically forcing Singh a question at the end, like there, where he's like, do Canadians still care about the climate crisis? Up until that point,
because the entire section has been about pipelines and the energy perspective, and nobody's addressed climate change at all, except Blanchet a very little bit.
And it's crazy because when we look at the 2019 election, Andrew Scheer was completely, when they would talk about climate change, it was like they were out to lunch, the Conservatives, because I do think this is a matter of where the electorate is on this issue. And I think, these parties have internal polling and they're like thinking, okay, climate change isn't a priority. In 2019, you had the global school climate strikes. We were turning out hundreds of thousands of people at a climate strike in Toronto. And there were strikes in cities across the country. I just say Toronto because that's the one I helped organize. I was a part of an environmental group at the time, and it was a very salient issue. That year, the Green Party got 6.5% of the vote. This year they're polling at 1 or 2%.
And 3 seats.
And Manly got a third seat, and they got seats from coast to coast. They won a seat in New Brunswick and in BC, they won seats. So, and they did well in Kitchener too. Morris didn't win that year, but they did well there as well that year. So they got, it was Morris ran both.
Morris was there, yeah. Morris came second that year.
Yeah. Okay. So they did very well, and it was an extremely salient issue. And when there was a topic of climate, the NDP, the Greens, and I think, we were robbed of this, and we can talk about that later, by not having the Greens in the debate. But the NDP, the Liberal, and the Greens were all trying to outlib each other, essentially, on this issue. Like, they were trying to say, your plan's not going far enough. The Liberals are promoting the carbon tax, and they're trying to fight over, they're fighting over, we're not approving pipelines, we're adding carbon taxes, we're going to invest in these green energy. And it was like, basically, the Conservatives, they even had conceded on, like, yes, humans are contributing to climate change, it's a big issue, and they still kind of take that slant in Canada, but we're not going to basically interfere in any meaningful way. They were even at that time, it was like talking about, we're going to do it by investing in, new energy resources. Like, they weren't even anti, renewable. It's like, okay, we're not going to add a carbon tax. We're not going to cancel pipelines. But we're going to do these things. This time, it's literally all about affordability, cost, how can Canada's economy prosper, all this knowledge that seemed to be kind of accepted in the zeitgeist seems to have really evaporated. And I think COVID and then subsequent issues have removed its saliency, and it's also removed its saliency from even within the left, I think, as one of the most pressing issues as a crisis itself.
I certainly think so. Okay, so let's move on to clip number 4. And I want to preface this clip, not that we should have to, but I think that given the sensitivities that exist around this issue, we should point out that we're both Jewish. And and while we don't,
so we're allowed to say things
for ourselves, but that's essentially, I feel like there are times where we have to say that, because
don't call us anti-Semitic.
I'm gonna have a moment about that after we watch this clip, because
I know. I'm just saying.
Well, first of all, we must condemn Hamas, and more importantly, the terror sponsors in Tehran who initiated the attacks, the horrific attacks of October 7th. We need to defeat the terrorists so that all the peoples of the world can live in peace and defend the right of, yes, Palestinians to have their own lives free from the oppression of Hamas dictators and Iranian intervention, while Israel has the ability to live in freedom and peace. But I also want to say, we need to get back to the Canadian tradition, which is that when people come to this country, they leave foreign conflicts behind. The rampaging riots targeting Jewish communities is utterly unacceptable, and it points to the growing chaos that we see on our streets after 10 years of incredibly irresponsible liberal policies, of weak borders, of dividing people into groups, of saying one thing to one group and the opposite to another, dividing and conquering. We must end that division and unite our people so that everyone feels safe, and that when we come here, we put our foreign conflicts behind and we put Canada
people,
first.
Mr. Singh, come from countries from around the world, and they care deeply about where they come from, and they should be able to do so. That's a part of being in our country, to have that freedom. Your treatment of Palestinians has been frankly disgusting. Your treatment of people who provide care and service for people in Gaza has been disgusting. On top of that, people in Israel and in Palestine deserve to live in peace and security. And Mr. Carney, to date, you've not acknowledged that what's going on in Gaza is now clearly become a genocide. It's important to call things out as they are, and you've not done that.
Mr. Carney.
We need to work, to go to your question, we need to work with our international partners, maximum pressure.
Okay, so let's be clear about this, because I've had it with Pierre Poilievre on this issue. I have had it with the Conservative Party on this issue. I have had it with Donald Trump on this issue. I have had it with the Republican Party on this issue. I have had it with these fake-ass people trying to weaponize anti-Semitism, trying to weaponize our experience as lived Jewish people, to use it to attack a group of people who are actively being slaughtered. This isn't a war. This is a slaughter. This is a genocide. This is a Holocaust. They are trying to exterminate a group of people from the face of this earth. And they are using our religion to do it, to justify their, to try to justify their acts of terrorism, to try to justify this behavior. And then they are going around and saying about the people who are standing up to this, the Jewish people who are standing up to this, the Muslim people who are standing up to this, the Christian people who are standing up to this, and of every faith and those with no religious beliefs at all. They are trying to weaponize anti-Semitism. And I want to say, as somebody who has experienced anti-Semitism, I grew up in small farm country, white Ontario, Canada, where I was the diverse kid in school because I was Jewish, where I had students tell me that it was too bad our school didn't have an oven for them to put me in front of the teachers and the staff at the school, and they were not punished. Nothing was said. As somebody who has genuinely experienced anti-Semitism in this world and in this country, because it is a real thing and it does need to be called out when it occurs, there is absolutely nothing anti-Semitic. There is absolutely nothing anti-Jewish about criticizing the terrorist state of Israel, because that's what they are. They are a rogue terrorist state led by a madman wannabe dictator, in the same way that the United States is now led by a madman wannabe dictator. And we can say in Canada that our job is to stand up for democracy and to oppose fascists and to oppose and to support humanity. And we can have all of those beliefs and say all of those things the way that all of the party leaders are trying to do. But unless you are prepared to call out Benjamin Netanyahu and say that your RCMP would arrest him if he sets foot in Canada, would arrest Yoav Gallant if he sets foot in Canada, will stand up for the state of Palestine and their right to self-determine and their right to exist, unless you are prepared to do that, you have no business speaking about the issues of war and peace in this world. Stop it. Stop using Jewishness. Stop using anti-Semitism to attack a group of people that are just trying to live. Of course, you have to condemn the terrorists in every society. That includes Hamas, who are a terrorist organization, and that includes the Likud party, who are a terrorist organization. And the double standard that exists, I'm done with hearing people say release the hostages, unless they also mean the thousands and thousands and thousands of Palestinian men, women, and children that Israel holds without any justified proof of any law broken, other than the fact that they dared to want to live in their own land.
Yeah, I feel like there's no, it's like that false equivalency, but it's not, it's like masking. It's like masking the like the like the underbelly. Like you can stand up there and use all these phrases, but they're just like, they don't mean anything, and it's just giving excuse and credence to the actual, like the state that is an aggressor right now to carry out whatever actions they want. When you're saying people can't protest, and when you're labeling every protest a violent mob, you're saying no one in this country should have the right to have free speech, essentially, and advocate for like anything, really. And it's quite dangerous, I think, to talk like, act like we're in a democratic country. We might take away those rights. It's
I agree.
Yeah.
I think on that we should also note that Mahmoud Khalil should be freed. That the people who have been deported from the States to El Salvador without any due process or anything like that should be returned. And that's something also that's important to note on this issue, because free speech should be sacrosanct. It should be kept very, very where it needs to be. And also that Pierre Poilievre's threat to use the notwithstanding clause preventatively is a dangerous thing to be talking about when this is the climate, both here and internationally, on these issues.
And relate this to something, this is happening right now at a local level already. You know, the city of Toronto is debating this bubble zone bylaw, which would essentially make it illegal to protest within a certain vicinity of like schools, hospitals, places of worship, certain buildings, government, like there's a list. And when that you map out the list with the distance radius that you're not allowed to protest, you wouldn't be allowed to protest pretty much in all of downtown Toronto. A lot of the protests happen along University, and they go from, let's say, City Hall to Queen's Park, that you're not allowed to protest on private property. So one of the only places you can protest is public property, aka in the street. A lot of these protest routes happen in the street, in these public spaces, and pretty much that entire route, that is where protests traditionally happen against the government, would be illegal. So essentially, you're taking away charter rights when you are enacting these laws. I think it's an extremely dangerous, and it's a very slippery slope to even be discussing and it, let alone saying you support it at a national level.
Absolutely. Okay, so now that we've got that issue dealt with for the moment, and I'm sure it's something we'll come back to at some point because it continues to be unfortunately something that we're having to deal with. We are going to be moving on to discussing, I think, the couple of process stories, and maybe we'll just briefly mention these. The first one being that the Green Party, it was announced the morning of the French debate that they would not be allowed to participate in either of the debates because they failed to meet the requirements, 2 of the 3 requirements. They had, before the debates, had claimed that they would meet 2 of the 3 and thereby could be included. They ended up not getting the 90% of candidates. That was the second of the 3 requirements that they had said they would qualify with. And I think that it is important to say that while the rules around the debate should be respected and should be followed, and that's fair, the fact that they waited until the morning of the French debate to announce this is not a good thing. It's not something that should have happened from the debate commission. It really reflects poorly on them. And it's something that is quite unfair to the Green Party to have been told, oh yeah, no, that's fine. You're good to participate all the way up until the morning of the debate, and then all of a sudden everything's pulled back. The other party leaders who have been preparing to have Jonathan Pedneau on the stage, Jonathan Pedneau, who has taken time out of his local campaign and his national campaign leader events to do debate prep, has now wasted all of that time. It's quite an unfortunate circumstance to have happened, and something that just really isn't helpful from the debate commission.
And I do think they should, like, it's very good we have an independent debate commission in the first place. And I think if you set rules, you have to stick to them. And I think we might get that with the media allowance, but like they need to be consistent, and there is a so I understand, like you said, not allowing. I think you could maybe make the rules a bit more lenient. Like if you have, like, they met the one member of parliament condition, but since they weren't polling at 4%, and they didn't field 90 candidates in 90% of the ridings, I do think that riding rule, I think, shouldn't be there. If you want to come up with a different third condition to then it's okay. But that riding rule, I think, really takes away from the ability for parties to strategically place candidates, place resources, and also work together. We just saw it in the Ontario election, I was advocating for not running NDP candidates in certain ridings and not running Liberal candidates in certain ridings to defeat Doug Ford. And I think it takes away that incentive. Parties already don't want to not run a full slate of candidates because of, it appears weak, or they get a per candidate subsidy based on how many candidates they're running. So there's all these reasons that parties already, it disincentivizes this action. And I think this is another rule that does it. I don't think it should be relevant. A nothing party can run a candidate in every election. The Rhino party could run a candidate in every riding. I don't think it should be since they set it out as the rule, I understand it, but I don't think it should be one for the next election.
I agree. I think that the standard should be, are you running enough candidates where you could, if you won in enough seats, form government, right?
Mm-hmm.
As that third thing. Not the 90% line is so arbitrary that it should be that like you have to be running candidates in at least 172 electoral districts. And as long as that's the case, you should be able to fit that that third requirement. I mean, I've always felt it's kind of ridiculous that the bloc is included in the English language debate.
Well, they kind of set up the rules to allow the bloc, right? Because then there's the two other ones, polling at 4%.
They do, because they could have put
allow the bloc.
Yeah, they could have put the polling line at 6% instead of 4%, and that would have kept the bloc out, because the bloc usually is at about 5% in the polls. So it's that kind of these arbitrary numbers that they use to get the stage that they ultimately want to have. Yeah, I think that there's a lack of trust in some things that the debate commission does around that. Speaking of which, the other major failure of the debate commission was that they accredited a number of journalists from right-wing smear groups, troll factories, like Rebel News, that completely monopolized with irrelevant questions the leaders' post-debate scrums after the French language debate, and that led actually to the post-debate scrums being canceled following the English debate, because the commission wasn't prepared to say no, only one question per media outlet, which is all it would have taken to proceed ahead.
Which was a rule they had. And they also actually said we're only allowing, the original rule that they had set out was one representative per outlet. And that was the rule. And then the Rebel threatened to sue because they said, well, we have different like subsidiary outlets. How does CBC have so many people here? It's because they have like regional, like each regional CBC like network is their own outlet. So, and then Rebel said, well, we have that too. So you have to allow us to have like, so many representatives. And it wasn't
they
just
wanted
Rebel,
16 people.
There was True North was there as well.
Yep.
Like, if anything, you could get around all of this from, well, it's what's ran them into trouble in the past. When Trudeau tried to say, you're not a news organization, we don't have to let you in, like, then they tried to like sue on what the definition of a journalist is. Essentially, as soon as and
lost that lawsuit, by the way.
Yeah, Rebel News is funding, like, like they're a third party, they're a registered third party advertiser, not Rebel News themselves, but they have some like sister organization to allow themselves to do this stuff. But it's like you can very easily like find the documented link between them. It's like, you're a third party advertiser, you cannot be present in the media like scrum. You can't be a journalist. That should just
be kind of standard.
Third party advertiser, like you can't do it.
Yeah. So those were the process stories that dominated. It resulted in Rebel News it resulted with a number of representatives of Rebel News getting removed from the press room at the debate site last night before the English language debate. There were confrontations between Rebel News people and journalists in the room.
And staffers for the candidates.
And staffers for the leaders. There was a confrontation in particular with Rosemary Barden and David Cochrane while they were live on air that they had to cut away from them to deal with, that ended up with them having to be surrounded by a police perimeter to protect them. Like, this is the kind of stuff that just should not be happening in Canadian democracy. So that's that's where we're at in terms of that, which flows quite nicely, I think, into our winners and losers of the week. And how we're going to do this today and going forward is we'll both share our losers of the week, and then we'll both share our winners of the week. And my loser of the week is the debate commission for all of the aforementioned issues. They pulled off some, actually, like, the debates themselves were decent, and we've talked about how they dealt with serious issues and all of that. But I think that was more due to the two moderators and the leaders themselves. The commission has revealed itself to be, while necessary that we have one, this particular commission, these particular people running it, are incompetent. They did not understand how to keep this a professional setting for journalists and for the leaders and for the campaign staff. They didn't understand how to run this successfully. They messed up so many different issues. The Green Party being disallowed on the day of is incredibly anti-democratic. What happened with Rebel News is ridiculous. This is not a news organization. They should not have been accredited. Okay, let them sue, fight them in court. Then at least if a judge is allowing it, you can turn around and say, well, we didn't have a choice. We did everything we could to stop it. But this capitulation on the threat of a lawsuit is just, it's sad, it's disappointing, it's not what we need out of our democratic election institutions, which is what the debate commission is supposed to be. So going forward, whoever wins this election needs to look at seriously redesigning how this works going forward.
They let the bulls.
Isaac, who's your loser?
Yeah. My loser is Pierre Poilievre, because he had to do something to change the state of the race, and he didn't. Simple as that. Like, there were a lot of people online, a lot of conservative supporters saying, just wait till the debates. Just wait till the debates when he wipes the floor with Carney, and then everything's going to change. It was cope. I always thought it was cope, and I think it was proven to be cope. I don't think enough has happened. So I think he loses by not winning.
I think that's a pretty fair assessment. Yeah. All right, now we're going to move on to our winners of the week. Isaac, do you want to start us off this time?
Sure. My winner of the week is the Canadian electorate, because they got a chance to actually hear the leaders talk about policy positions in a fairly substantive way. And I know I keep coming back to it. I do appreciate that our debates have not been turned into a reality show, popularity contest. Like, obviously it's an election. It's always going to be a popularity contest, but they can be substantive. And honestly, I think it's okay. There's only one of them. I don't think debates should be determining your vote, for who you want to vote for. I think one English and one French debate is can be completely satisfactory. I think having the whole campaign be months long like it is in the US and have like tons and tons of debates, I think is not helpful for anyone, where they become like, this like showmanship Hunger Games type event, American Idol. I'm grateful that, in our elections, they can still have these types of conversations on a public stage, despite the debate commission's best effort to ruin them.
I agree with you. I think that's a good winner. My one wish for next time is, guys, do them a week or two earlier into the campaign.
Yeah, not the day before.
Right? Don't before advanced polling starts. There's so little time for them to have an impact at this point that, like, that's the only part of them that does, I think, make it feel a little bit reality TV-ish, is just that, like, it doesn't feel like there's the time for things to kind of flow from them into what happens next. We're 10 days away from election day at this point. and so that would be my one thought on that. But I agree with you. Definitely, they were substantive. They were issue based, and all of the leaders got what they needed to out of them, which is why my winner for the week is Mark Carney. Because I think that these debates were the one opportunity that the opposition leaders had to attack him, to damage him electorally. And nobody really successfully put the kind of glove on him that they needed to result in a significant sway in the polls away from him and towards another party. And so I think because of that, we are probably looking at 4 years of the Mark Carney mandate. These next 10 days are likely to be fighting over whether that's a majority or a minority. And I think that there is still some room to play there. But I think that overall, Mark Carney did what he needed to do in these debates to get as close as he could to putting this away. So for that reason, my winner for the week is Mark Carney.
And go vote. Now you can vote this weekend.
Go vote. All right. Absolutely. I'm voting today. All right, we're gonna close out now with our final regular segment, where we just share a little bit of hope, a little bit of positivity, a little bit of motivation to move forward and move ahead. So with that, here is maybe one of the best speeches ever written and ever given from the great, the late, the amazing Charlie Chaplin. Right. Thank you. Thanks very much for joining us for another episode of No Power Panel. Please remember to like and subscribe and follow us, and maybe leave us a comment with your own thoughts about how the debates went.
Thank you. Have a good day and a good long weekend.
Absolutely. Let's all go out and get some power. All right. Bye.